Today I'm visiting the permaculture farm of Andrew Martin, author of the book Rethink, Your World, Your Future, to talk about tiny houses, permaculture, and how they can fit together as part of a bigger plan to create a brighter future for our planet.
I worked in the finance industry for a number of years, and I learnt lots about what's happening in the economy and global markets and business, stuff like that. But then I went to an investment seminar. I remember that was a chief economist from one of the major banks in Australia, and he said something really interesting which sort of stuck with me. He said, they're building cities the size of Brisbane in China every month. And for people that are unaware of Brisbane's a population of about 2.2 million people. And I just thought, wow, that's completely unsustainable. How can that continue on? Like 2.2 million people every month, cities. So that's a huge amount of resources, you know, cement, fibre, wood, energy to run these cities. And I thought, wow, you know, can this go on? And then another interesting thing got me thinking. I went to an investment seminar in the US, and I was on the way back. I was sitting next to this big Texan guy. He worked in the oil and gas industry for one of the largest players in the world. And I asked him about what's going on with the energy sector, and he said, mate, it's all over. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, we've found all the easy, cheap oil and gas, you know, we can find, and we're struggling to find stuff now. So, and that made me think as well. I thought, wow, you know, we've got China, we've got this huge growth paradigm, and then I just said, this is all unsustainable. So my wife and I, Beth, moved from Sydney, put everything in a 20-foot container, and just took it to New Zealand looking for a more sustainable and a different lifestyle. But since we've been here, we researched more and more about the energy side of things, and I just started to connect the dots more and more and more, and just realised that we're living in a completely unsustainable planet, the way we're doing things. A lot of people don't realise, but a barrel of oil contains 6.1 gigajoules of energy, which, for those that don't understand the energy side of things, that's equivalent to 1,700 kilowatt hours. And 1,700 kilowatt hours is effectively 10 years of human effort and work. So one barrel of oil, which sells for between $50 to $100, depending on the time of year, does the work of, does 10 years of human labour, which is astounding. Another interesting thing that I've found in my research is that this is crazy, this blew me away. It's like, we've used more resources in the last 50 years than all civilizations prior to us. That's just unbelievable. So we've used more coal, oil, natural gas, wood, fisheries, you know, the soils have been depleted. I think the number is something like 30% of topsoils have been washed away and gone into the oceans. Like, that's just crazy. So we've got all these economic, environmental and social problems, and we need to, I think, change the way we think about things. So we've reached this point now that we just need to live a lot more simply. It just makes sense. So that's one of the reasons that we've got into the permaculture and the farming. I just thought that there's an interesting report that came out of Australia from the motoring body. It's called the NRMA, which is a premium motoring body within Australia. And they said in Australia, the supermarkets have 3-day supply of food. Like, think about that. So what that means is if the boats from Asia or from wherever the food's coming doesn't arrive, you know, the supermarkets will be out of food in 3 days. And Ceres, the organic organisation out of Melbourne in Australia, they did a study, and they monitored a basket of 25 goods in the average supermarket, and they found that basket of goods travelled 70,000 kilometres to get to that supermarket. That's just crazy. Like, we just need to localise. And that's one of the things that I realised, that, you know, having some land and being able to grow your own food is really, it just makes sense. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to grow as much stuff as we can locally, and, you know, so we've got multiple crops in here. You know, we've got vegetables and fruit trees and you name it. So we're just trying to do as much as we can and diversify it and move away from that long distance supply chain. Like, we don't want to have our food travelling 70,000 Ks to get here, because it just doesn't work. It's not going to work. I think we've reached this limit, and as I said, as we're connected with this energy and the economy, and what's happened is the debt has grown more and more significant over the years, and that's a part of the problem, is that people are wanting more and more stuff. Like, you know, you've got to have a fancy imported car, you've got to have a boat and a holiday home, and you've got to have all this stuff, and to do that you need more debt. And also what we're seeing in places like Auckland, in New Zealand, and Sydney, Australia, and Toronto, Canada, and Vancouver in Canada as well, is the house prices are astronomical. You know, looking at $750,000 to $800,000 to $900,000 for a standard home these days, and that's just really expensive. And you know, you've got to be making some serious money to be able to afford that, and you're locked into a mortgage for maybe 30 or 40 years, and that's just crazy. Like, you're spending your whole working existence, every living moment, working to pay off a house. But we've gone from this localized model to a globalized model, and I think what we're going to see is we're going to go back to that localized model, and I think that's the key. And the things like the tiny house movement, you know, that's perfect for, you know, the tiny houses and the permaculture. They just mix together in a perfect synergy, because tiny houses are about downsizing and having less debt and not being the chain to the wheel, so you can be free to do stuff. So you don't have to spend, you know, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 on a house. You can spend, you know, maybe 50 grand, if that, and then you've got a house and then a bit of land, and you're done. And then you just grow your stuff, and you're, you know, self-sufficient. You can do more things. You can be more creative, and you can just enjoy life more and think about life. So it's really interesting. So since we've been here working on the property, you realise how much physical labour it takes to do stuff. Like, I pretty much work all day out in the land here, and there's still heaps of stuff to do. So what I think was going to happen, and what we'd ultimately like to have, is 2 or 3 tiny homes on the property, because, you know, we can free up ourselves to do less, and then we also help someone else out that doesn't have the land, and they can share in our experience, and they can grow their own food and that sort of thing. So I think that's a really interesting model, and there's lots of people I know that have properties, and they've got the same issue. They need help, because being organic and using minimal, you know, fossil fuels does take a lot of physical human labour. So it's really handy to have other people, and it's also good for community as well. So my understanding of permaculture is living with nature as opposed to against nature. So it's about people care, earth share, and fair share. So that's what we've tried to do here. Is when we bought this property, it was vacant. It was just pasture. So we've planted thousands of natives and fruit trees. So we want to live in the forest. So that's the idea. So when you walk through the property, eventually it feels like you're in the forest, and yet there's food all over the place. It just feels good. I think that we're going through 3 revolutions at the moment. The first one is the awareness revolution. So the internet's revolutionised in many ways how we communicate. So we've got social media and things like, you know, Aves, Some of Us, Change.org. You know, they're doing lots of activism work and building awareness. And there's lots of good people out there doing initiatives, even at grassroots levels. And that's the most important place to start, is grassroots levels. So you build that awareness, and that leads into the simplicity revolution. So that's where the tiny homes fits in, because tiny homes and simplicity go hand in hand, because once you're living small, you don't need as much material possessions to make your life worthwhile, or you know, you declutter, and it gives you clarity to look at the big picture. And then that takes us through to the third revolution, which is the inner revolution. So once we've simplified our lives, then we can sit back and say, okay, look, what am I doing here? Why am I here? And how can I help others? And that's what it's all about, I think, is looking more deeply in our current society, this long supply chain, highly capitalised, debt-fueled economy. doesn't allow us the time to look more deeply. We're so busy chasing the dollar, trying to pay the mortgage and, you know, get the kids off to school and, you know, do all these things. You know, we forget about ourselves and we forget about the reason we're here and, you know, how we connect with nature and others, and we just lose that stuff totally, and it becomes a never-ending cycle. And then what happens is you wake up at 65 and you retire and you go, wow, my life just passed me by. What happened? And I think the tiny home movement is brilliant because it allows people to enjoy life now as opposed to when they retire. When, you know, a lot of the time people when they retire they're ill or they've got degenerative diseases and stuff like that, and they can't enjoy life. So enjoy life now. That's my message, is, you know, get out there and just, you know, downsize and enjoy life for what it's worth, because, you know, life is short.